Good morning, everybody. Good morning. That's always so much fun to hear, teacher. We haven't made it yet. I just wanted to thank you all for coming to the panel this early in the morning on Saturday. This is awesome. It's very exciting.
So if you guys are hardcore. Last night.
Yeah. You might also guys take pictures just for my records, not because I want to put your all your faces on Facebook, but just because I like to keep track of how many people showed up. It used to make me tell them at work, like, how many people were there? And I'm like, I don't know. I kind of forgot to count them. So that, and I take pictures, and that helps me remember. Now they don't ask anymore. It's still useful to know. Cold outside today.
Haven't been
Haven't been outside today. You're standing here.
No.
No? You've just been here. That's Magfest. We had a room on the 17th floor, which is great, except now there's a nightclub on the 19th floor. So you get a little noise. It's not that bad.
That's okay, you get a little noise.
You get a little noise on every floor.
Exactly.
Yeah. You get a little noise. Yeah. No, it's good. They got a white noise generator in the room, so you can just tune that out. Yeah, I thought that was nice, you know. I mean, my husband found that on the TV. We're going to listen to the sound of rain falling, so we don't have to listen to the Colossus first.
I came out of my room and found this pile of pizza boxes. Not a couple whoa, that was funny.
You know, I came out of the room and about 3 doors down there was just a pile of unidentified mush. And I decided I didn't want to know what that was. Probably cute, but you know.
Yeah, the risk of turning this technical is if you're getting a lot of noise coming from a different floor, there probably is low frequency. And if you consider using either pink or brown noise instead of white noise, because of like you can't stop low frequencies.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, pink or brown noise.
And then there are websites that will
Here's the next job. You have a music identifier. Pick up what it's listening to. Grab a copy of the song, look at it, and do the inversion. It's easy enough to like the stream simply. And from a couple megabytes for the whole song, just grab it immediately, identify the inversion, and just project the inversion.
So we'll just start having all the inversion.
Yeah. See? So I think we're ready to get started. So hi everybody, good morning, and thanks again for coming out, 10 in the morning. We're going to do a little panel today about AI, what the state of the art is right now, what's good, what's bad, what's ethical, what's not ethical, and what we think the future is going to be, and what we think is going to replace ourselves with robots in the next century or so, decade or so, who knows. My name is Amanda Lang, and I am a Microsoft technical evangelist. I live and work in Philadelphia, PA. That's my Twitter handle, and you can also find me in my email if you want to grab a card later. You can do that. I have been working for the past couple of years with a lot of different technologies in Microsoft, including AI, including the Cortana suite, including cognitive services, natural language processing. I also have an interest in AI for games and that kind of thing. So I'm here to facilitate as well as provide my own opinions on the topic, and we'll just go down the line. So please introduce yourselves.
Hi, my name is Daniel Greenberg. I'm an adjunct professor of game design at George Mason University. My master's thesis was on sort of a transmediation of games and opera. So specifically, a lot of what I look at is the intersection of various forms and where those art modes line up. I'm also the founder of Winter Ion Game Studios, based out of Clifton, Virginia. We produce the YouTube show Ion Gaming.
I'm Chris Hazard. For about the past decade, I've run Hazard Software. We've done mostly strategy-level serious games, which means that we're focusing on making games to help organizations solve their problems, especially in the strategy space. And we also made the 2011 RTS Acron, the time travel RTS. We build it for us to send them back to time, and Peter Rabbit stories where they built theirs, and et cetera, et cetera. And this last year, we spun out a company called DivePlane, which is basically all the AI tech Hazard Software has been developing for a while, focused on explainable, editable, auditable, transparent AI using algorithms different than neural networks, and then aiming for performance comparable to that. My PhD is in AI as well, particularly the game theoretic aspects of trust and reputation. How do you build a resilient reputation and trust system, and how do you exploit it?
Well, how to do this one. My name is Mike Sellers. I'm the director of the game design program at Indiana University. I've been there for about 3.5 years. Spent about 20 years in the games industry before that, mostly working on MMOs, as lead designer in Sims 2 and a bunch of other projects. part of that background in cognitive science. For 9 years, I ran a company called Online Alchemy, where we did artificial intelligence primarily for games. So a lot of our work was done with DARPA to create explainable, audible social NPCs, non-player characters that could interact with you. One of the big projects we did with them was a simulation to train people in the military how not to shoot people. That was our informal tagline. Basically, how to interact with other people in social situations. So we did some really interesting AI, had some interesting successes and failures. And still working in that area, trying to bring better NPCs to games.
So, thanks everybody. Before we get too deep into the weeds, I know I titled this panel the AI Singularity. I'm wondering if anybody wants to take a stab at defining what they think the singularity means exactly. But yeah. You want
to start with Werner Vinge or?
Yeah. Well, there's a technical. Yeah. There's a whole background there. So.
Well, I'll tell you I don't know if this is a shared definition or not, but where it comes from is the idea that things change so fast and the rate of change achieves an infinite slope and just changing so fast you can't possibly keep up with it. The way I look at it honestly is that a small s singularity is any time things change to the degree that you could not predict on one side of the change what things are going to be like on the other side of the change. So the easiest example I think most of us will recognize is the web. Prior to the advent of the web, maybe I'm going to do it a little bit, but prior to the advent of the web, you couldn't have said, oh, this is what life would be like on the other side. But you can look at the railroad, airplane flight, automated self-driving cars, as well as falling in love, having a child. These are things we go, oh, I could not have possibly understood what this was like before that. And so a lot of people talk about the AI singularity is that we are rapidly approaching a point, exponentially approaching a point, where AI is going to change our lives in ways that we can't possibly imagine. Now, there's also the biggest singularity. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Yeah.
I guess I would add that to build exactly on that, the biggest singularity would be that there isn't an S-curve. And I'll explain what an S-curve is. So in many areas of technology, in evolutionary stable strategies, when you have a new species that invades or whatever, many times it looks exponential. So initially you get a few things that are starting to change. People build a little computer that works with hydraulics or gears or whatever. They're really expensive, just a few of them. And then there starts to be a little bit of acceleration. It looks kind of linear. And then all of a sudden, there's a big jump. There's some sort of a leap. There's investment. There's a lot of advancement. And it looks exponential. Holy cow, it actually is exponential. And people love to extrapolate. And so wow, this is going to continue this way forever. And the biggest singularity is that is where it's going. The AI is going to, solve cancer, solve energy problems, build isospheres around planets, solve just everything you can possibly imagine, and we can't predict that. And so I personally regard that as a bit of a fantasy because almost everything has some sort of S-curve. And at the top of that S-curve, there's an exponential region, just like everyone's adopting the web. And now it starts to solidify a bit, it starts to coalesce. And the curve starts to dampen down, and now you still get incremental changes, but it looks like that nice S. And then there's S curves within S curves. There's multiple technologies that come out, and so I would say that's at least from my perspective, the big S singularity definition.
And when you're talking about the web, I think we had a lot of ideas as to what we thought the web was going to do, because that was what the whole .com boom was all about, right? And some of those things were ahead of their time, you're going to do all your shopping online, and it was too soon for a lot of people, and we didn't do all our shopping online until we did, and now we do all our shopping online. Even groceries come to my door from Amazon now. Not all my groceries, but a few. And they bought Whole Foods, so they really do want you to buy all your groceries from Amazon.
Yeah, so to simplify this, because I'm a huge Simpsons guy, if disco sales from 1977 to 1979 are any indicator, whoa! But, yeah, so adaptation occurs at some point, right? So there's any innovation. I love analogies. So civilization does a great job representing this with seminal technology that you develop and it pushes you into new eras and new ages. And things change, but then they normalize, right? You adapt, the system accommodates to something. In biological systems, you have a new agent arrive and it's a big game changer and it shuffles things around and it seems like, oh, this can be a complete destabilizing agent. And then the rest of the system kind of works to accommodate for it. AI, I think for the most part, functions in the same technological level where it comes in, it acts as an agent of change, things get shuffled around, and eventually there's an adaptation window. I guess to play a little bit of devil's advocate, the only question then becomes, when AI becomes quicker at destabilizing things necessarily than the normal agents that exist, non-AI agents, can perhaps adapt to it, then things maybe get interesting. But prior to that point, I think you still expect the normal kind of reaction.
Well, this is a great counter to Chris's S-curve. I totally agree with that things do adapt out. But the idea that the adaptation builds on adaptation, and you have not just computing, but self-driven computing, that's what's going to drive this curve continually exponentially. By the way, in terms of adaptation, people say, how's AI affecting my life? In the late 80s, I was on one of two major teams. We were losing teams, but nevertheless, one of two major teams working on speaker-independent voice recognition. It used to be a huge thing. Now you call it Alexa or Siri. It's just something you have in your house. And we've all kind of adapted to it, but it's still changed our lives in ways that we have a hard. We won't see how Alexa changed our life today for 10 years.
That's really a great segue, because I kind of had a slide talking about like what AI is in our homes today and what AI is being developed today and what are we actually using. Because Alexa is now a big part of a lot of people's lives. That Amazon, that little Echo Dot, or the bigger, or the Google Now Tower, and OK Google. I have Cortana on the slide because being a Microsoft person. Also, I love that we went ahead and took the same name as the character from Halo. I thought that was like, yeah, we're gonna stick with that. We're not gonna change it to something boring like Microsoft Assist. Yeah. The slides are flipping?
You're intrigued here.
We see your wonderful wallpaper.
Oh, you probably like.
So this, by the way, this is going to be on YouTube, so I might as well say this now. Alexa, play Dave Brubeck. Okay, you're headed to do it.
That's weird. You're all staring at my wallpaper.
Now we can now see it.
Now you can see the slide. Great. Okay.
Keep changes. Yeah.
Oh, I can't see what I can't.
Mouse up, over.
You know what? They said they were having problems with the screen earlier. No.
There we go. Okay, enter. That one.
Yeah, I know. That's what I wanted. I usually can make this work. They said they were having some problems earlier. Can you guys see it now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, we'll leave it there then. Okay, yeah, you can see the panel on the bottom, but that wallpaper is Jupiter, like the surface of Jupiter. Yeah, I like it a lot. Well, anyway, so there's some pictures, and if they stay up, then great, and if not, you guys can probably see the little project thing, can't you? Yeah. Well, it's all right. But so let's talk about this. No, I know. Okay. I'm trying to fix it. Okay. Let's talk about what AI we allow to have in our homes and watch us and stuff like that. Like we have Alexa, we have Google Now, we have Cortana potentially, we have Siri on phones, and people have started to make, I think, more or less daily use of these things without really thinking about it. Like they're starting to incorporate that in their day-to-day routines, and the technology underneath that is you've got your language recognition, your language processing, and then you've got it connected to a big knowledge base, whether it's Google, whether it's Bing, whether it's something else, and then it's connected to that and uses that information, and it also stores information about you. So, what other AIs besides that, the kind of most obvious example, do you think you interact with on a daily basis today? And how do those things work? Like, what's the technology underneath those things?
Well, a real subtle one that you might not think of is a lot of the AI behind your map, your navigations. Google Maps. You think, okay, well, if I want to go here to there, and sure, maybe they're using some simple algorithms, to sort of get the general path. There's a lot of research that's going into, okay, based on traffic, based on road conditions, accidents, time of day, what types of, do you want to pay tolls or not? Sure, some of that is pretty simple, but there's also how do they get that data in the first place? They're driving cars around that are just slurping up data left and right, computer vision to translate some of that into 3D representation, to find the road signs, to circle all that data. So even though you're interacting with one thing that feels like an AI, there's a whole zoo of AIs supporting that technology behind the interaction with one at a time.
I think it goes to the old saying, which I think was said first about the web, many pieces loosely joined. That we don't have one AI, other than Siri or Alexa, but it's mostly the stuff that's sort of behind the scenes like this. There's a ton of AI built into Google Maps and Waze or anything else. And of course, this being games conference, we should talk about games too. There's a ton of AI built into games, and not just in the game characters and things like that. A point I brought up the other day was that NVIDIA is a huge company in large part because games have pushed technology forward, the GPU and vector-based computing technology forward. It's had an immense effect on what AI is possible. And the single biggest place we're seeing that right now, we're not there yet, but is in the advent of self-driving cars. NVIDIA is behind almost all of the efforts, they're powering almost all the efforts for that, which depends on a lot of what we would call low-level AI. It doesn't look like AI when you really look at it, until you really look deep into it, but it's basically AI.
Yeah, I think for me, maybe some of the most compelling stuff is also some of the most insidious. Who here has cut the cord? Like, had a cable box and removed it, doesn't happen, okay, a couple of you. One of my favorite pieces of software is RenTrack. And RenTrack is a group that has stuff installed on just about every cable box in the country. And it's not just one thing to know, like, oh, they're watching channel 6, so we can get ratings data. Like, they're destroying the kind of stuff Nielsen used to do. What buttons do you use to change the channel? Are you the kind of person who uses numbers, or you go channel up, channel down? Do you raise or lower the volume? Mercedes-Benz pays on a monthly basis to know how many people are watching, changing the channels during their commercials, raising or lowering the volume, like how they're interacting with the commercial using the remote. And then that data they pay for, you know, big data analytics results on that, so they know, like, oh, we're going to take an extra 10 S-classes and move those from, like, Topeka to Kansas City because we think we can move 1 or 2 more of those cars. Like, the level of granular detail that they can pull from that kind of large data gathering is just amazing, and I'm waiting for tech. I guarantee you they'll move the games here. Like, they will have that same sort of behavior on Steam, Xbox, PlayStation, give it a couple of years.
Well, so I was in the free-to-play space for several years, and we had really granular data on all of our players. Free-to-play depends on 1 to 2% typically of anyone who's buying anything. The other 98% or so aren't buying anything, and of the 2%, a very small percentage are buying a lot of things. And we could tell with a high degree of confidence, if you join a game on Tuesday of this week and exhibit these 3 behaviors in the first week, you are going to be a $20 spender, or a $100 spender, or a $1,000 spender. I mean, it was really advanced, and we're always working to advance more for the same reason Mercedes is doing, is you're going to take more money. But so at least in the free-to-play space, that's already there and being.
Are they then selling that to developers? Like that?
This was a developer. I mean, we were the
developer. Oh, the developer knows that.
Yeah, no, I mean, every company that I know has their own secret sauce for this, and it's very closely guarded.
Right.
And big data is a huge part of AI because that's what drives a lot of the AIs that we use. I mean, even if you have gone to a retail brick and mortar store over the past 5 years, you probably have a little tab on your keychain that's like, I have 16 tabs on my keychain, and every single one of those is like tracking my purchasing behavior so they can send me specific coupons so they can, and that's all automated, that's all an automated system. And there's also the algorithms that drive things like YouTube recommendations and Netflix recommendations, and those things are a lot more invisible, but they're also an AI that's running in the background and can do some weird things. Everybody sees different categories when they go into Netflix of what movies that Netflix recommends to them. Sometimes they're really highly specific and fine-tuned to what kind of taste that you have.
Social media and politics as well, what you see on your feeds, who it recommends or thinks that you should talk to, or political organizations that are well funded that are trying to just get more voters or do the data and do the analytics to figure out what they want to do. Now, I should also make a little caveat that there's kind of a blurry area between analytics, the traditional statistics, and AI. There's not like one or the other. It's kind of a continuum. And then also, I mean, from the more nefarious, or depending on which side you're on, purposes of destabilizing, a lot of intelligence community folks are using AI for various purposes.
So technically, I think all of us have some technical background. What would be your, what kind of AI have you coded? What kind of AI would be your choice of coding suite for AI? What have you worked with, and what's an interesting story you can tell me from that? Let's go. Yeah.
All right. Okay, this is putting me in a spot for my company DivePlane. We focused on a bunch of algorithms that are not, they're basically not neural networks. So we make them explainable, editable, auditable, etc. And one of the issues with neural networks is right now you also have to architect the network. So it's not just get it plugged in, but you have to say how many neurons do I want, or how many columns, what sort of functions am I going to use, what are my initial weights? There's tons of questions. There's actually something called TensorFlow Playground where you can spend an afternoon just playing and tweaking and tuning the algorithm on small data sets. So we said we want to eliminate that. There's a lot of folks doing that with neural networks as well, making AIs to simplify that process of deploying it and architecting it. But so I would say, I mean, our suite, that's what we've been using internally for about 6 years in our company. We've spun this off and just trying to make it something that an engineer can use. Sure, they might need to know a little bit about features, they might need to know a little bit about data science, but trying to drop that barrier down a bit. So that's the big one, and that's kind of a little bit of sales pitch. But also on top of that, my favorite go-to for, like here's a problem that might have some adversarial aspects to it, especially in games. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, Monte-Carlo tree search. Something you can implement in a couple hundred lines of code, and it works really pretty well on low to medium dimensional spaces. Even, I would say high dimensional, but not all, but especially if you've got adversaries, what are they going to do? So what that algorithm is you randomly make moves, and you probabilistically go where you're going to not fail. That's it. That's the whole algorithm. It was invented in 1984-ish, I might be out by 5 years. Guy wrote a PhD thesis on it, and it performed okay compared to other algorithms at the time. But if you throw a little bit more resources at it, and a little more computational resources, it does really, really well. It's a pretty robust algorithm.
Is that similar to the AI they taught to play Tetris?
They taught to play a bunch of different things.
Yeah.
The one thing I don't like about Monte-Carlo tree search is it's a brute force algorithm.
Yes.
I mean, it's the kind of thing that operates well with gigabytes rather than megabytes of RAM and faster processors. But it is really cool. It's just plays millions of times. Play Tetris or Go or chess millions. No, this isn't AlphaGo, but played a bunch of times and like I said, probabilistically go to where you're not going to lose. And so since I'm talking, I've done a lot of work in neural networks. It's not my preferred by any means. There's a special sort of subbreed of neural networks called Cahonin nets that I particularly like. They do really well at clustering and finding clusters in different kinds of data, which for my purposes turns out to be really good because what I'm really interested in is non-player characters or characters you can interact with, and they have to be able to form kind of abstract concepts, like they have to form an abstract opinion of you, for example, and that requires some interesting generative cluster topology. The problem is it doesn't fit into any particular basket of algorithms. It's got a little bit of what's called a belief, desires, intentions setup, where the AI believes from things about the world, and the world tries to do things based on that, and then learns from those things. Which, oddly enough, one of the things that fell out of this was a reputation system that I published on. We should talk about it. So,
And then personally, I'm more in the educational space, but particularly for 1 and 200 level students. So a lot of what I have to do, because I'm a graduate computer science program, but then I went for my master's in the art program, so I'm teaching a lot of art students, and trying to ingratiate them a little bit into this space. Obviously, you can't just throw like, okay, here's your assignment, it's in Lisp or Prolog or something. You're gonna shock these poor kids. So we'll do a lot of predicate logic, but it's kind of explaining the predicate logic, conversationally, or kind of understanding the concepts in a way that how they're constructed without actually assigning them, programming homework. Personally, I'm starting to explore generating average actors. That is to say, we've kind of challenged AI to master games. Now the question is, can we challenge AI to play games at a human replacement level? We talked, or there was a discussion yesterday, Frank Spaldi, Shannon, Paul, or Phil, the people that were doing the game preservation panel. The question came up for them, it's like, well, how do you preserve these MMOs? These MMOs are dying, how do you save them? And Frank makes this amazing point. It's why the History Foundation does what they do, trying to save the metadata about the games. It's one thing to preserve the game code, the server could be able to run it, but if you've ever picked up an old MMO, played it, and found 5 people playing on the server, that's not really the game. It's not the same unless you have the user base there. Well, what if you can construct a picture, because WoW does an amazing job of this. You can see where everyone was for a certain encounter in any raid that anyone was running global logs on, and get a complete movement-based action set, what they used, when they used it, their chat logs. You get so much information about these players, you can reasonably start to consume all that data and build what an average raider looks like. Then you construct 24 AI average raiders, jump in with them, and have a simulated raid. All of a sudden, you can have 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 people, and you can experience what that game was like at that time if you can build someone who is a rough equivalent of the average player.
That's amazing, actually. That's almost Black Mirror-ish.
So actually, one other thing that I was going to mention too, that I don't think of as AI, and let me caveat that. There's a statement that echoes in the halls of academia once in a while that AI is computer science problems that have not yet been solved. And so I think of game theory and information theory as not AI, but I mean, it really is. And so game theory is the mathematics of strategy, developed mostly out of economics, but also out of wargaming, usually assured destruction, like what if Russia's going to nuke us or the Soviet Union back in the Cold War, and how do we deal with those types of really hard strategy problems. And actually, a lot of my background is in game theory. It's how you reason about that purely mathematically. So it's an exceptionally powerful AI technique, especially when coupled with things like Bayesian inference, where you're dealing with probability theory and inferring, well, here's a distribution of this, here's a distribution of that, how are they combined, what do I do from that, how do I reason about my opponent. The drawbacks of game theory traditionally are that oftentimes you get an infinite or uncountable number of what are known as Nash equilibria, so your best strategies or solution concepts. And so you're like, okay, it told me nothing, really. It told me everything but nothing. And how do you prune those down into what people, organizations, or agents in the game should actually do? But if you have other thoughts around it, you can strain it further, like, I want to maximize my own ambiguity, so my adversary has to do everything they possibly can, minimize my opponent's ambiguity. You can hone that in with information theory and some other techniques. And so in a sense, it doesn't feel like AI, because all you're doing is modeling a problem. But for anybody who uses the system, it totally is AI.
Here's what fascinates me about AI in the game space in specific, is that game developers are the people who have the greatest incentive not only to recreate human beings as AIs, and with all their flaws and problems, but also the greatest incentive to create AIs that will be adversarial to you. Nobody else is going to do that. People that are making like a digital assistant, they want that AI to be helpful to you. Maybe, more helpful than you would even anticipate. Like, oh, I didn't remember that I had to leave for that appointment today, but Cortana told me I did, which happens to be all the time. Well, hey, I used your Google map and my knowledge to determine how long it's going to take you to get to an appointment. But on the other hand, like a game developer has a reason to make an AI that will actually get in your way, because that's what they're supposed to be making.
We were for a couple of years on what we call the Nemesis AI, which was, this has been done a couple of times now, but not the way I'd like to see it done. But the idea of your best friend at the start of the game helps you through the tutorial of the game, and then something horrible happens, and without meaning to, you end up harming them or betraying them. And they shake their fist and say, I'll get you. And then they appear at multiple points through the game where they have been modeled on your experience, so they're a mirror of you. And at the very end of the game, you're able to vanquish them, of course, that's what you do with your nemesis. But that turns out to be a really hard problem.
Shadow Warrior is something similar to that with the orcs, where that's it, the Nemesis system. Yeah, it's tremendous. It's amazing.
And a really hard problem.
Oh, it's really cool. I saw a hand go up, so we will have some time for questions at some point near the end. I'm going to leave at least 20 minutes here, so I'm going to move on to social issues in AI, because I feel like this is a big one. And in terms of data collection, one of the pictures I have here is like how to fool a face detection device, because there's people that are like, I don't want to get triggered by a facial detection device. So, or this thing about you were talking earlier about getting a competitive advantage by finding out who's using your product. There's a search engine called Shodan that allows you to do that, and that makes me laugh so hard because it's literally just called Shodan. So enjoy that. So. What's scary right now? What's an interesting social problem to talk about?
So the TV series Person of Interest is fantasy, but it's less and less fantasy all the time, and it's less fantasy in some places. In the UK, it's much less fantasy than in the US. We have this idea in the US and most of the developed world, I guess, that we have a right to privacy. We have a right to be secure in our persons and our papers. And a whole lot of things we do with AI chip away at that in some from not just cameras everywhere, but to the idea of being able to fuse all those images together and to build a profile of you based on where you were seen, when, with whom, what you posted on Facebook, what they posted on Facebook, what you're doing on Twitter. It's, I believe, still fantasy, though I haven't kept up with some of what the intelligence community is doing in this. But it's within the realm of possibility to build a really good profile of you. And to say, well, you say, well, I don't think I don't want a law-abiding citizen most of the time. Okay, that's great, until someone decides they don't want you to look like a logged on abiding citizen, and by tweaking a couple things, you can suddenly look like something very different. And that's, I mean, again, I'm stepping out on a limb here in terms of the fantasy, but it's close enough that it's something I think about.
Let me actually expound upon a few of the city's details of things you can extract. Let's take a game, and some of you might have heard this before, the panels I've done in privacy, but let's take a game like Tetris, or something that's very benign. Okay, you've got my Tetris data, you see what I've played, you see the blocks I've placed down, the times I've played, there's no personally identifiable information in there, so what? I don't care. And maybe the game developers is downloading the data and keeping it because they want to improve their game. And then another company buys them out, another company buys them out, and the data's in third-party hands, and they're an aggregator. Now, what can they do with that data? Well, one thing is that when people are depressed, they tend to not overvalue positive utility events. Now, what that means is that if you're not depressed, you tend to think, oh, shiny, this is great, and think it's better than it actually is. That is a measurable characteristic. So now we can get a probabilistic, some sort of a distribution over the results and say, okay, these people are more likely to be depressed than these folks. We can also say, if you're dieting, during the times that you're pushing away food or not eating that you would normally be, or eating less, your cognitive performance drops by a small amount, but a certain measurable amount. If it drops by too much or too little, it's not, but we can get some probability of whether or not you're dieting. And all of these things, AIs can sort of extract, and even if you don't know why, you don't know the mechanism, if you've got enough data, you can pull that out from different populations. And now this Tetris data, who cares about it, also has your browser fingerprint in it, which is the characteristics of screen resolution, your plugins, and that actually tends to be almost unique. There's only 5 people in the world with their exact software versions of everything, and now they tile that back together, and that's you. So they know all that from that simple little bit of data.
And that data is available to more people than you might think. My favorite sort of bait and switch on this is when you read terms of service and you get that warm fuzzy feeling when they say, we will not sell your personal data. Yeah, but we can lease it. For $20,000 a month, we can sell to the right company the ability to come in and run queries on our server. We're not selling your personal data. They have access to it, and they'll build off it, and they'll use it anyway. But we're not selling it.
Or they're acquired in next year, and that company has no...
Yeah, like Chris said, all of a sudden the stuff changes hands, and Snidely Whiplash Incorporated suddenly has access to all the stuff you've been building for 10 years, sure.
And as somebody who works for a big company who by necessity does collect data just to make our products work, it's a challenge to write like a really good privacy document that is human readable for you without still legally explaining everything we need to explain. So a lot of times you might see on one of our test web pages, we don't keep your photo, and they try to put it in as plain as language as possible because they want you to understand that they don't keep your photo, but they might be training an AI, with that photo, which is different from storing it and keeping all the metadata and all that. So a couple different things. So we have a couple websites that we use to train our AIs, and you're welcome to use them when we don't keep your photo.
Just on that note, I was involved in an AI startup that didn't go anywhere, but we were using Facebook data. And this is early in the days of Facebook. I believe their terms of service have changed. But at the time, we could and pretty much did slurp up the entirety of Facebook. From any person, we could say who they're connected to, who they're connected to, who they're connected to. So unless you're on Facebook and not connected to anybody, we had your data. And that was completely legal and, according to Facebook, completely acceptable, so long as we never wrote it to disk. So as long as it sat in memory, which it did for months, that was fine as far as they were concerned. So, and we didn't do anything nefarious with it, but we looked at it a lot and said, there's a complete open door to everybody's Facebook history here.
Going back under your point about machine learning and pictures, so okay, we don't show your pictures, but we train a model on it. And the model is basically an AI brain.
That's what facial detection is all about, for example, yeah.
There's a lot of work recently, especially in the past year or two, on generative adversarial networks and related techniques. And what those do is they say, okay, we've got an AI that can recognize people or can recognize different specific people, and let's give them examples that are let's give them optical illusions that they'll get wrong. And so that the AI sort of fight each other and improve each other back and forth. One of the things you can do with those techniques is you can say, okay, how do I change this just a little bit? Like if I got a picture of me, how do I change it to a picture of somebody else? Just subtly by altering a few pixels to fool the AI. And by doing that, you can also learn what is actually in the AI. to some degree. And we're not quite there yet, but it's moving in that direction. So even if your picture's not stored anymore, there's sort of like an image, a fingerprint, something of that still retained in many models. And that was part of the inspiration for what my company's working on, is making sure that you can provably remove all the data from an individual person. So that if you want to be forgotten if you're in Europe, or if you want to comply by those laws, you can actually remove that and not have those traces left in the model.
They've also used an adversarial AI like that to generate images of fake people, which is to say you can't tell they're not real people, but they're not real people. The AI just created them out of making an adversarial network that recognized people until it knew what people looked like, and then made pictures of people that never existed before. So that's kind of cool, you know. So later on down the line, it will be much easier to potentially fake photos.
If I can go back just to be clear,
Yeah.
Something you said about the adversarial AI, when you think of this, this is not a future thing, this is a today thing. Article on this just in the last few weeks about an AI system that's in wide use across the United States in, I think, most states and counties to help judges do sentencing guidelines. Say, how likely is this person who's just been convicted of a crime to commit another crime? And it's widely used. And what they've been able to show is that from the output of this, from the recommendations this thing makes, is that if you are a white male, particularly, like, I think they're seeing things like if you are a clean-shaven white male, you get a better score than if you are not male, if you have a darker skin tone, or if you have facial hair. There's a few other things that are kind of weird like that. I think people are still working on unraveling that. Was this an algorithmic issue? Was this like a data set issue? Was this, in the past there have been a lot of brown or black people who have been given harsher sentences, therefore that gets encoded in, so they should have harsher sentences in the future. This becomes a real systemic problem. And when people say, well, it's AI, so and this whole thing was created to remove the systemic bias. But now it's been encoded in the AI one way or another. I don't think it's really clear yet how that happened. But it could have been as simple as unconscious bias on the part of the people making the AI. There's a really good set of tests from Harvard, the intrinsic bias test. I think if you haven't taken it, you should do so. Everyone has biases, and the best thing you can do is know about them, especially if you're doing anything for a population like this. But I look at that, and that's kind of horrifying to me, because it's in wide use, and because of things like Siri and Alexa, we're pointing out, oh look, it's a new cool AI thing. That's great. It's an unmitigated good, as opposed to saying, hang on here, is this thing really giving us the results we want to have?
We had an ethics course years ago at George Mason, like an entry level thing, and we early on would have to justify why do you have a 100 level ethics course? I think now more than ever, it's why don't you have a follow up to that course later on? So once they've gotten good at programming, why aren't they thinking of something at the tail end before we send them out to the world? There are so many opportunities now for these data sets to replace human level decisions that we have to wonder about, like you said, what's infected those AIs that have been built. They've been built on the decisions we've made. We have taught our own children our own problems. I worry about things like Sesame Credit, and but it's one thing without getting too into the weeds, it is a large-scale system in China that is designed to essentially give a citizen a score based on their behaviors, based on who they associate with, whether they take actions that are or are not considered to be rewardable or laudable by the state, and those scores can affect things. In fact, the most impressive thing about it from kind of a scary standpoint is disassociating yourself from unliked individuals on this social media platform will actually improve your score and give you more access to things. So it's a way to break up what could be potential cells of thought in otherwise, this nation that is obviously predicated in some way on a certain specific way of thinking.
This sounds like Black Mirror episode that really should have said that.
Yeah.
They're actually making that. It's in China.
Yeah.
And when he says things, it's like your credit scores, getting loans, getting into schools, getting jobs.
And
airplane tickets, getting anything,
And it can seem like, oh, well, yeah, we're progressive, communist, whatever. There will be commercial versions of this. There are smaller scale commercial versions of this. Capitalism will find a way to make its own version of it. There are three major credit unions, and we were all dealing with the issue with, I believe, Equifax was the one that had the massive data breach recently, right? But those credit agencies are commercial organizations that are designed to try to make algorithmic decisions and assign you a number to determine whether or not you are a good or bad candidate to give like a loan to, or to allow to buy a home. So we have versions of this already, and if you can imagine, they are going to be just as excited to build as comprehensive a profile on you based on as much, AI-driven data as they can possibly acquire. That's going to start shifting things, and there's no reason they won't be like, oh, we can also start doing social profiles or start doing, pictures of you based on your behaviors and where you go and who you're around in the neighborhood you grew up in, and start making predictive decisions that start knocking 5 or 10 points off your score here and there before you know it. Yeah, those models become very insidious themselves.
And just to be clear, this will be sold, and I would say will be, I don't think this is really much of a question, this will be sold as a good thing. This is good for you. You want this, you want to be part of this because this helps weed out the bad actors, because you're not a bad actor. And, and what you're doing is saying, okay, this company, whoever it is, Equifax, but we're going to assume that you are not only competent but have strong ethics yourselves, and there's no indication of that. There's through some of these things we've talked about, there's indications that even when people are trying to behave ethically, things can creep in, biases can creep in that may not be apparent for some time.
So last little discussion topic, and then we'll go to some audience questions. Do you think, and on the slide here I have the universal paper clips. Has anybody played the universal paper clips game? That you'll lose like 2 days of productivity, but it's really fun.
I'm avoiding it for that reason.
Yeah, so it's super good. And the idea behind the paper clips game is that this is an old thought problem of like an AI that decides it has one focus, and it's going to do that to the detriment of every other thing. I personally find that to be more far-fetched than some of the other apocalypse scenarios. But if an AI were to totally go apocalyptic, what do you think that would look like right now, based on what we know?
I've actually already answered. There's a video that you may have seen been going on. It's done like a guy doing a presentation about their little tiny drones that can do facial recognitions and 3 grams of munitions and can go and shoot someone in the forehead. And it's made to look scary, intentionally. And yet, I've talked with a number of my friends who were in different parts of those fields. None of people that I know of anyone who has put a small 3-gram charge on a small drone. There's no reason you couldn't. The facial recognition is dead easy. 10 years ago, I was involved in some work on doing what we call wolf packs of autonomous vehicles, basically large swarms of drones. That these days is dead easy. None of these things are hard. It hasn't been done yet. But if someone wanted to say, find this person or neutralize everyone who looks like this, or is dressed like this, whatever, not hard to do. So I don't fear Skynet. In fact, in AI game circles, a couple years ago, there's a rule 0 for making AI, which is don't make Skynet. Always in all caps. But I don't really worry about that. What I worry about are things like this, a far more distributed effort that is going to look like something good, Sesame Credit or something like that, that is then paired up with something in the real world like an autonomous drone who always follows you around and can anticipate your needs, and if necessary can neutralize you. That's the kind of thing. There's an apocalyptic scenario. That's the one I worry about.
So I'll bounce off of that and give other thoughts too. One is that to sort of concisely say that it's technology can be used for good or evil. You can use nuclear power to make nuclear power plants or nuclear weapons, and AI is no different. It's just how are people going to use it? Now, one thing that I would note is that depending on the data an AI is trained with, it can feel remarkably alien. I mentioned before about my favorite example is those adversarial networks. What is an optical illusion, so to speak, for an AI, for a specific model for a machine vision problem? You look at them and what it thinks, I thought this was a giraffe. No human would ever think that it was a giraffe at all. Maybe it has a slight little bit of giraffe in the print, but it's not an optical illusion. A great example from a short story, which I don't know what the original story was from, a science fiction story. AI was everywhere, ubiquitous. It was the tool that people used to make things, and all the trains were phenomenal. They always ran on time. All of a sudden, there's a massive accident, train, crash, and they couldn't figure out why. And finally, it turned out to be they removed a clock from one of the train stations for repair. And all of the AIs had trained on looking at clocks. And when it didn't see one, it didn't know what to do, and so it just kept on speeding off. And it's those sort of, if you don't know what is in the model, that is sort of an apocalyptic, like, what are we building on? What's the foundation? Nobody knows. Nobody cares. How can it collapse? We don't know the modes of failure. Now, more of a weird and positive thing, and at least I think is a positive thing, a fascination of mine, I guess in the past 6 months specifically, has been on the research on feral children. Now this sounds really weird from an AI panel, but let me explain. Feral children are ones who are, for whatever reason, they're lost out in the woods and they're raised by wolves, so to speak. Usually about like 2 years old, 4 years old, or whatever, some older than that. And depending on when they're lost in the woods and if they're recovered, they exhibit very different behaviors. The ones that are lost around, be 6 years old and they're found when they're 12, they can lead pretty normal lives. But if they're lost around 2 and they were raised by whatever, and they come back, they act like animals. Nobody's ever been able to train one of them a language, to train them to really do anything, and they act like undomesticated wild animals implicitly. Conversely, let's look at Coco, the famous gorilla who had sign language, and some of the dogs, we teach them and they act very human to us. And I kind of have now we can't do research on feral children because that would never pass any IRB in the world, but, or like to make new feral children, but I kind of have an internal hypothesis that there's something, like there's some software, so to speak, of this humanness that is us. And maybe this consciousness or whatever is things that are part of our social upbringing and the molding that we get, that we can kind of do to domesticated animals. And so if we can do this, impart these sort of behaviors on machines, maybe they can be more human or as human as us someday.
And I think it's great to talk about the good things that can come from this too, not necessarily just like, ooh, what's scary about AI, but how can we help and facilitate people and make lives easier and improve the world? And then there's lots of ways that I think we can do that, just by making transit easier, getting food to the right people at the right time, and all kinds of things that pathfinding and AI can't help us to do. So it's important, I think, to have those conversations too. Like, well, there's a lot that's a little bit horror story, but there's also a lot that can be great. What were your thoughts on it?
I mean, yes, so there's logistical solutions. Shipping has been the big solver that's kind of changed the commercial space recently, but there's lots of little nuances in those areas. There's the control systems we have for water and electrical and data grids and how those are going to change over time, and hopefully, kind of egalitarian out a little bit as that's something more widely available, because the networks become more intelligent. We can get everything to everyone, We're not looking at scarcity like being a thing of the past necessarily, but as you slowly optimize these systems to push them closer to elimination as concerns, that's going to be, I think, a good thing for everybody. Beyond that, I guess the other thing that I'm kind of looking forward to a little bit is seeing where the evolution of non-meat, we never really got into meat as a thing, but non-meat solutions become available as our language expands a little bit and get a little closer to democratizing communicating with machines. Because as machines better learn natural language, we can start communicating with them. What sort of solutions the community writ large is going to start developing for AI. I always look at the early applications that we've been writing for stuff like Alexa and the sort of programs people are coming up with. And I picture 20 years down the road being able to teach your own in-house assistant natural language programming, just discussing it, so I want you to oh, can you do that cool thing where you this and that? And they're like, yeah, no problem. And all of a sudden, the lights in your house start doing the disco thing, and it plays your favorite song, and it's all mapped out to a thing because someone came up with their own sort of greedy algorithm for making that work. I guess I'm more excited than anything else, seeing what people program when the machine knows what it's asking them.
Cool. Great, that's everybody. I would like to take some questions. I know there was one in the back, and then there's one up here. Orange in the back first, and then we'll work our way toward the front. Is there a microphone going around? Or no?
It's okay, I can speak loudly.
Oh, yeah, don't have to be loud.
We'll repeat the question.
Yeah.
Yes, well, first it's just kind of a comment, then I'll lead into the question. It seems like most of the AI work that the individuals here, or just in general, is being done is analyzing data, using AI to analyze data in a large scale. It seems like just from the discussions we've had today, is that true, not true, or is it's just, that seems like the main use being put forth for AI?
It's actually a big question because a lot of how AI works now is analyzing data just because of machine learning and neural networks. So some of what I do is analyzing data, some of what I do is natural language processing. which isn't necessarily data analysis. It's more like trying to figure out what the user meant by that thing. I work a little bit with
Perhaps
text
you could
and
broaden it
chat,
then to just analysis.
chatbots. Yeah.
Using the AI to analyze something where you would need many minds, but the AI can do it all at once.
Let me take another, see if this resonates with you all. Just in terms of is AI these days about data analytics, I think a lot of the techniques we've come up with in the 90s and 2000s have proven fruitful in data analytics, and there's a lot of money to be made in this, which is why it's a common topic of conversation, common use. For me personally, that's not where most of my work has been done. Most of my work has been done in trying to generate social NPCs, people, listen to me. Non-player characters that you can interact with and not trying to pass a Turing test, but that at least don't feel like a vending machine dispensing a quest. So it's, but in doing that in the early 2000s, I figured now is at least 10 years too early. So, you know, which is a good thing.
And one of the things is that, as was mentioned before, a lot of the money has been in big data analytics. A lot of the companies who have the biggest, the petabytes worth of data are paying, and they can afford to have a data science team that really digs into this. But my company, DivePlane, has been looking a lot also on what we call the small data problem of, okay, you only got 5 data points from this customer. They've only bought 5 things from you in the past. This other one bought 3, this one bought 10. Now, what do you do with them, and how do you best reason with very small amounts of data? But then also, you can take similar approaches to, like, let's say, we did an application for a drone control. Actually, we're working towards drone swarm control. You know, in 30 seconds to 60 seconds of flying a drone, like an Xbox-like controller, you know, our system can reproduce that behavior of going from waypoint to waypoint. Or, you know, 5 to 10 minutes, it can navigate waypoint to waypoint in a warehouse-like environment avoiding obstacles. And so that's sort of real-time interaction. A lot of the algorithms, because of where the money has been and the research has been focused on those big data analytics, but it's definitely not the only place. And there are folks like us that are focusing on that as well.
And to make that intelligent NPC, you still are reacting to data. You're just reacting to different data.
Right.
You're reacting to what the user's input was and how AI is more about the machine understanding you than it is about anything else. I think.
Actually, one of the most difficult problems we encountered was how to act when there is no data, when there's nothing to react to. And again, back in the military simulation, if a player asks an AI a question and the AI refuses to answer, how is it that an AI refuses to answer? Because it's a valid choice in that situation. And so having to figure out, on either side, having to figure out either can the AI refuse to answer or how do you react when there is no data to react to? Turns out to be a really interesting problem.
So there was the big event in World of Warcraft, for instance, a long time ago, where there was a particular raid where when you left, you'd still be poisoned with this toxin from the boss. You know, people love to talk about it. Right, so then it basically infected all of Ironforge, and everyone was dying, and they were hiding and hoarding the data for a long time, and were not willing to release it because they thought other people would copy or somehow get their game in. But this was back in the early days of Warcraft. 60 was still the cap, I believe.
The CDC did extensive studies on that.
Specifically for how, for viruses spread. So I guess my question is it viable for companies to protect that data? Is it more important to share that data? Is it dangerous? That's kind of the question there. Then how often does human psychology intersect with AI, and at what point is it like you already kind of talked about the bias, where we kind of put our bias into it, so that's the human psychology aspect, but at what point are AIs going to basically better be able to determine our own psychology than ourselves?
It's a complicated question to repeat
Yes.
at the microphone, but there's kind of 2 questions there. First of all, human psychology in AI, and when will AIs feel human, I guess. And then also, like, when is it viable to release your data, which I think is kind of very, to me, like, to answer the question of when is it viable to release your data, it's very situational, I think. Like, there's times when it would obviously be of a public good to do so, and there's times when a company would have a privacy issue for their users to protect that data.
And also strategic uses. We've got some customers who are like, okay, if you work with us, you have to have this on premises. You can install your software here. This data is not leaving this building.
There's a few reasons. One is strategic advantage, but the other is, as a company, you don't know what's in the data, and there are certainly privacy issues, but there may be a fatal flaw in what your product is. There may be something someone else could exploit if they got a hold of the data. And once you let it out, it's like posting a picture on the internet. Once you let it out, you have no control of where it goes. Even if you say, oh, you're not going to give it to anybody else, right? Okay, but then they do, and then it's out.
And I fear that's a consideration that doesn't come up often enough, because I think most firms are going to just do a simple cost-benefit analysis. They're just going to chunk out like, okay, well, how much did it cost to get this data? Can we compile something new later on? How much can we sell it for? How much can we lease it for? And like you said, once it's out there, right? And there's an opportunity cost, and then there's also the consequential and the cleanup side of things, whatever comes of that decision, that oftentimes we don't factor in. It's a matter of just understanding what all the variables in your case are, just how much damage can be done by releasing that information. And sometimes it takes a very creative mind or set of minds to come up with that.
And sometimes companies too, not that I'm illegal or anything, but it's part of the company's reputation to say like, listen, we have a commitment toward your privacy, and therefore like at no price will we do whatever it is. So it's just, and that's why they write those privacy policies. And the psychology question, do we want to chew on that for a minute?
I can offer a few areas just based on my own work. So a lot of my work has been done in emotions, and giving AI emotions, not mimicking emotions, but actually having an AI that feels various emotions in the same ways that we do. That's led to a lot of interesting research and development work. So emotions, I would say, is a solved issue, but it's much more solved today than it was a few years ago, when it was really sort of discounted entirely. But the other big areas that I look at as still being really, really difficult. I mean, there's natural language generation, we have a lot of progress, things like that, in areas like that. But areas like humor, deceit, and empathy. Empathy, I think we've got a good line on. Humor and deceit are, like, for me to deceive you, I have to have a model of what you want in my head. And sometimes that model can go several layers deep, and that becomes a rabbit hole. And then humor is, there's good evidence that someone who experiences humor is totally neurological in its basis. Some is cultural, some is cognitive, and some we just don't know. Giving that to an AI is incredibly difficult, and yet without emotions, empathy, humor, and maybe even deceit, an AI feels non-human. It feels weird to experience the interactions with it. So those are huge areas I don't think we're going to solve next week.
And one thing I just see too is that in some regards, working at really hard strategy problems of organizations that have more defined goals or more understandable goals is easier than an individual person.
Yeah, definitely.
So, question up front? Yeah.
So I got an Echo Dot over Christmas, and I was kind of like playing with it, trying to determine, how it responds based on certain keywords. So there are two scenarios that like my wife does all the time. She'll say, Alexa, play iHeartRadio, or Alexa, open iHeartRadio, and you get two different responses based on that. So does it work on keywords, or does it like look at a flow chart based on certain words that you say, or like I was just kind of curious how.
No, I don't know the inner workings of Alexa, but Cortana does work on specific keywords. So like if you're trying to do a search and you say search, on the Xbox you want to say open, or yeah.
One technique that might surprise a lot of folks in here who are not in AI is something known as bag of words. Now, it's not used in all natural language processing programs, but it's a very easy technique. Is you take all the words in a document or the person said, and you just throw them into a big bag and you count the number of times they use that word. And you compare that vector, that feature vector of the weights of each of those words, with a bunch of other techniques, things called stemming, where running and run end up being the same word. You can start to pull all those together. That actually works surprisingly well in a lot of cases. And so even though, is it keywords, is it not? Some of these simple techniques go a long way.
If you've ever seen a tag cloud, that's basically just a visual representation of that process. It's aggregating what people are saying, how often they're saying it, and kind of weighting everything. It's just the difference there is it's presenting it to you in a human consumable format, and this would be more sort of the AI consumable version of it.
My favorite non-technical description of that is, this is what it's like when you half listen to your spouse. You're really not sure what they said, but you can kind of figure what they probably said.
We're not saying that Alexa or Cortana use these but they might use the whole aggregation techniques. This might be several of them in the background, but these are large, very successful systems, so they probably use a bunch of different techniques.
And as far as Cortana goes too, you can extend that. So if you want to look at some of the documentation for how it's put together, you totally can, because we've got some of that stuff online. So if you create an application and you want to say, hey, Cortana, open block, you can code that yourself.
And just in case this is being consumed by future developers for those programs, I beg you, start tying our accounts to language recognition and word stuff. I know, having had, grown up with a doctor in the family, the speech recognition stuff and the specific technical language that goes into that particular career path, and how much work it took to get like those behavior patterns done correctly. That process can be sped up a lot at this point. I will say it's very hard to get my Google stuff at home to play Winter Ion because it has no idea what I'm saying when I say Winter Ion.
Right.
So I have to go and manually create a playlist and create a playlist and cycle it and give that an understandable name and make that name consumed, and even then half the time I end up with meme videos I didn't intend.
I'm going to put our contact info on the slide.
So I think the big next opportunity for that home stuff is, the home stuff's already tied to your accounts anyway. I found out the hard way when I tried to gift somebody some Amazon stuff this year that, oh, if you don't actually check in the checkout line, this is a gift for somebody. I'm like, oh, I'm shipping it to me, I'm gonna wrap it up and send it to them. But if you don't actually select this is a gift, any of those Amazon hardware things you're buying are being preloaded with your account. So I all of a sudden was like, I didn't buy Candy Crush today.
Oh, huh.
Yeah. I know, exactly.
It is 11 o'clock, but we still have a little time. We're going to let us keep room a little bit longer. So I know you had that question in the back, but you Steph.
Yeah. So y'all mentioned earlier about judges using analytics to help determine like if basically what kind of sentence to do. It kind of reminded me of like the Deus Ex series, like where they start using AI like as like the more perfect governance. Do you think like in 70 years we should be like welcoming our robot overlords? Or...
It wouldn't hurt to be polite.
But like,
The Boston Dynamics videos are going to be used against us in the Great Trial.
I guess do you see like AI is becoming more prominent in like governing?
Well, so I can tell you that the U.S. Senate, there's been a bill recently introduced about not regulating AI, but about actually encouraging, but very carefully encouraging AI development. Don't know if it's going to go anywhere or not, but I think we're a very, very long way from any sort of overt control. What I'm a lot more concerned about is like these sentencing guidelines, or if someone says, oh, here's legislative guidelines, or who should this senator or congressperson talk to? When you have things that are sort of in the background like that, that we all talk about virtual assistants, or we used to talk about concierge AI that will help me get the things I want to get. But the more we depend on those, the more things we don't see. If I have a concierge AI that says, hey, get me tickets to some new hit play. Okay, well there's going to be a dozen really interesting plays I'm not going to see them, I'm never going to be considered, I'll never know about them. It's fine, it's a play. But if it's what customer should I talk to? What school should I send my kids to? That kind of thing. Now you're having a lot of filtering being done outside of our direct control, and that gets to be pretty dangerous pretty quickly, potentially.
And with filters and echo chambers, a common problem that I've seen in a lot of organizations from hazard software customers from the strategy level series game space is you have some executive who wants something, and then they talk to their decision support team, the strategy team, or the modeling sim team, or whatever it happens to be, and say, model this out, give me some reasons to justify this. Or they'll say, answer this question for me, tell me what I should do, but really they know what they want to do. And the modeling sim guys come back and say, well, here's what this is what the data shows, or the model shows. They're like, run again. They'll keep going until they get the right bias. Now, with AI enabling making new videos, making believable text, sort of forging evidence, and what can you believe, what can't you believe, I think that will start intersecting even more and more with politics, especially international politics. Because you have all these different interests, and what better way than to start, influencing and possibly poisoning the legislation of your adversaries.
We could probably do a whole panel on fake news and how AI is going to facilitate the fake news. So it's going to get involved in politics because it's going to show you, which news you want to see.
And that, there's both sides of that. So there's sort of the human-driven side of things with legislative councils that are predetermining what policy looks like and getting those to the right stakeholders. That stuff will start being automated at some point, and that'll get really interesting. Especially when two AIs that are both trying to write legislation start fighting over the language. And then, the flip side of that is obviously confirmation bias is the most powerful force in the media right now, and it is working with such a reckless abandon that at some point there's going to be a very interesting kind of headway where if everyone's kind of into the same thing or into two specific things, what happens when those hit a wall. I don't know necessarily that I have any other great, just major fears on the horizon. I'm sort of an internal optimist in that respect. But I'm just more curious to kind of see where everything goes at this point.
Actually, one other point to that, and who here has heard of the game Gnomic? Anyone heard of that game? All right, let me explain this. I encourage anybody in AI who wants to get into AI to try to solve this problem. It fascinates me. It's legislation in a nutshell. So the game is you go around in a circle, you roll a die, that's your score, and then you keep on adding it up, going around in a circle until you get to 100. The first person to 100 wins. Basically Candyland, except there's one other rule. After your turn, or during your turn, you can propose an amendment to the rules. If you get 2/3 majority passing that vote for it, that is an amendment to the rules. All the rules are well codified. There are immutable rules and mutable rules, and immutable rules can be turned into mutable rules with different legislation and different ways of passing it. And very quickly, because the game is so boring, it ends up being a game about legislation and trying to change the definition of what winning is. And there's some games that have been played online for 15 years via email. You read them, it looks like legislation. They're defining causality. They're defining things that you think do not need definitions because somebody tried to really jam something in an interesting way. But I've not seen anybody work on that in AI because it combines natural language. Well, you don't have to combine it with natural language processing. You can do it in a programming language or a nice, concise language. But just that type of understanding of gaming rule sets. It bridges together all of the really difficult parts of AI right now. And I think that's a fascinating research project that I don't know, maybe we're not there yet. But if you're looking to do a PhD in the next decade or so, cool area to go into.
Sounds like trying to make a wish in D&D.
Yes. If this is solved, we can finally have an AI DM.
Yeah, and that was the project I started working on 10 years ago, the AI DM. I really wanted to make, yeah, everybody's like, yeah, you should do that. So I interviewed D&D players and tried to figure out how they deceive players and or trick players into doing exactly what they want them to do. So if you give somebody a module, can they actually react in real time to players doing unexpected things as an AI, which would be a really cool thing for somebody to finalize someday. There was one more question again, hands up, and then you might be close out of time. Go ahead, down front there.
Yeah, thanks guys, this is great. You touched a bit upon regulating AI, right? So Elon Musk is talking about it a lot. Personally, I don't know why people would be at it. Wanted to hear your opinions maybe and at what point should we be regulating it?
No one I know in the AI community doesn't roll their eyes at Elon Musk and Bill Gates and these announcements. I mean, I hate to say that they're obviously very smart, very tenacious individuals, but they just don't know what they're talking about.
I think there's things to be said about privacy in AI and about data retention and about things like the right data guide. These are great things that are highly overlapping with AI. But I agree on the regulating. AI might take over. Yeah, also think it's pretty simple.
I'm less concerned about AI necessarily running off and doing what AI wants to do than I am AI understanding the dangers that it can have on a human, an individual human, and AI having limitation of saying okay, well, I'm dealing with something that can only survive in between this degree and this degree in a building. I'm dealing with something that has to have oxygen on a regular basis and water on a regular basis, and understanding what the parameters are for it dealing with somebody else. In terms of going off and becoming the biggest and the best and the most powerful, that's just going to happen.
So right behind you, yeah.
I'm a researcher, have got my master's degree from George Mason. One of the things that I do is I make video games for AI to play, for machine learning. And bias is a big deal in the work that I do. There's a number of different types of biases, and we talked about sample set, right? If you're doing your sentencing, those systems should have been written without the names of and the race of the people. So if it's just criminal history and whatnot, then you make it a more fair system.
Actually, if I can step in there, even without that, you still have the same systemic problems because you get things like credit history. And in this country, if you are not white, your credit history proportionally, overall, as a population, is going to be worse. So those effects creep in. The bias effects are really insidious and systemic.
Right.
Sorry.
And I was going to say, the most insidious and the hardest one, and the one that I don't have any grip on at all, and it's really dangerous, and something that we should use as kind of a mirror to analyze ourselves as we go into this work, is when we went down to the very base level language processing. Some languages have gender assigned, like Spanish, right? Each words have gender. There's been research and work in non-gendered languages. I think it was Swedish. I can't remember, but like English, a non-gendered language. And the machine was tasked to provide genders to words, and so things like nurse and teacher came out to be feminine, right, while engineer and scientist came out to be masculine. And so they are reflecting our long-standing undercurrent social biases that even we don't really understand. Why are more women nurses and teachers? Why aren't there more women engineers? And that's something that we're trying to fix. But these machines are learning based on our language, and we may have these problems at the language level. How do we deal with that?
And that's always going to be kind of the big first hurdle. When you're making an AI, when you're making a deterministic thing, you're picking what to feed it, right? And where are you getting that? Are you using prior languages, like Romance languages that have this particular set and themselves are going to be in some way, injected with those behaviors from 1500s, 1000s, wherever that data comes from? Are they getting it from census data? Are they getting it from things that have echoes of things we've done 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 500 years ago? Or are you trying to build off newer stuff? And the newer stuff might be more egalitarian, might be closer to what you're after for, but does it have enough data? Does it have the right data? And the challenge is, the farther you travel in a data, the farther you go into that echo, the more anything that has bled into that data is going to somehow find its way in. Yeah, so there's a sterilization problem, right? It's hard to avoid that. Do you recognize and program around it necessarily? Or?
Also, there's an invisibility issue here too. When I started doing research into emotions and emotions in AI, I had a real uphill climb because it was seen as being frivolous. If you look at HAL in science fiction AI, the common definition of AI is making computers work like they do in the movies. Look at HAL, look at Data and Star Trek, all these things, look at Vulcans, they're all very emotionless. Well, it turns out if you don't have emotions, you can't choose what to have for lunch. We all think of ourselves as being really rational actors, but we're not. We are, almost every decision we make, maybe every decision you make, is beset by emotions, is driven by emotions. And yet we've had almost no research done on it beyond a really ironically rational approach to emotions, which just makes my head spin when I think about it. But that's changed in the last 5 years or so, 5-10 years. But for a long time, for the majority of the history of AI, we have studiously ignored emotions, and in large part because the vast majority of AI researchers have been men. And Western culture, culture of men, don't tend to bring their emotions to work. And we tend to downplay the value of emotions in our lives until we had so much neurological data that we said, okay, we really can't ignore this anymore. So that, again, it's changing slowly, but that's a completely invisible thing. And we can't account for what we can't see. And this is what I see sort of it's a little bit of a chase your own tail problem because you can never find your own blind spots. We need to have more ways, more different voices of people trying to help us find the blind spots so we don't look at people and say, oh, well, you have this kind of credit history, so we're going to give you this kind of sentencing guideline, or you have this kind of job, so you must be this gender.
So it's a technical problem that could be solved by more diverse developers, which is always great to hear, right? Yeah. It's like diversity is good, and we didn't have to, talk about that a lot, but at the same time, it underlies everything that we do, right? If everybody thinks the same way that makes the same product, you're not going to have new ideas being injected into your system.
So two other thoughts about that too. One, we need to talk about rationality, because I think there's a fundamental flaw in the definition of it as it's applied from game theory outward. And if you examine that, it turns out emotions they fall within relevant rational. And it's just that it's a bad definition. It's a semantic problem. But the other thing is, going back to your question, I'm a huge fan, and I quote this all the time, of a quote from the statistician George Fox. All models are wrong, some are useful. And this applies whether it's AI or any type of statistical model, any type of model of anything. So if you have this model, you've trained it, and it's working for certain things, and you agree with it for these certain things, use it for that. But if it's not working for something, don't use it, make a new model.
And I think, cynically, the thing that's going to drive the development is convincing people that things like emotions there is profit to be had in moving into this softer space because we've already explored so much of the harder space of this. But I do think that diversity and spreading out and getting a wider net of people inputting on this is going to be the solution to the problem necessarily. So I think it's important to kind of deviate between like what we have to say to make things happen and what we need to do to make things happen.
Well, guys, I think we're about out of time, but if you want to grab us afterward, I'm going to be hanging out and enjoy the rest of your Magfest. Thank you for coming out.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.